Hi, everybody. It's meteorologist Joe Chaffee. We are on a Wednesday night, 1 minute after 6 o'clock Eastern Time on this September the 19th, 2018. And we are watching on the satellite loop. If you look to my left here with the Eastern satellite loop, you can actually see a little bit of turning there off the North Carolina coast. So there is a wave that has developed. Also, by the way, to the south and east of that, there is the western part of an upper low. So just kind of a busy look as far as what's happening on the in the North Atlantic. And we're going to see whether this winds up somewhere in there are the remnants of Florence. I'm just not quite sure whether it's the stuff that went up through New England and went out to the east, because if you follow the remnant surface low, that's kind of where it went. But on the other hand, where you saw at least a little bit of a circulation on the satellite and on the radar, that moves off the Virginia coast and is now on the southern end of this frontal boundary. So I don't know where one starts and the other one ends, but it'll be interesting to see what happens with this, because we do seem to think that this wave is going to separate from the main trough and drop southeastward. I don't think it's going to really develop into very much, but just to watch it evolve and just to see what winds up happening ought to be some fun. We have Veronica Reese on telling us that the second gale center that went through parts of Ireland and England today, which followed the remnants of Helene a couple of days ago, was very fast but intense, and that's kind of what was modeled. You say it reminded you of Ophelia. Two people did lose their lives, 67,000 people without power. And yeah, I mean, judging from what we saw in the models yet the last couple of days, the next one for the weekend for going into Saturday night, Sunday, looks perhaps the strongest of the three. So maybe what we'll do is we'll start off with that first, and we'll take a look at what's going on in Europe. And I think the best way to do this is actually the seeds of all of this being planted in the Atlantic here, and we'll bring up the GFS first. We'll bring up a double shot of me. That's not what I wanted to do. So let's make me disappear. And this is what I wanted. Okay, I could probably run it this way. Let me see if this will work. Get a little bit more map in there, a little less of me. Let's see if all right. So we'll start with the GFS from earlier today, and you've got the old frontal boundary offshore. If you look toward Europe in the upper right, Europe, that storm that Veronica mentions already moved on up to the northeast of England and Scotland. The low that you see there to the northwest is really the main low center, and this was kind of just sort of caught in its circulation, and it's looping up and around. Now we have the next system, and that frontal boundary moves out. Let's see again, where does Florence end and begin? I don't know, but the leading wave that is out southeast of Newfoundland is what winds up getting energized and shoots out to the northeast and intensifies. This particular run, by the way, was probably the weakest of the last three runs with regards to the strength of this low. It is a little less intense than it has been over the last couple of days. Meanwhile, the bottom, two other things are happening. First off, the bottom part here, the southern end of this frontal boundary, if we assume that that's the remnants of Florence, that separates, and part of that circulation actually drops down southward, not too far offshore, but doesn't do much. There's a frontal wave that is out in the central Atlantic. Also, by the way, take a look at just the northeast of Venezuela, this little tiny speck of yellow, okay? That little speck of yellow is what looks almost like a very, very tiny little low here that develops. And it lasts for a couple of days, and then it's gone. So it almost is reminiscent of Beryl back in was it late June or early July? I forget, but it was early on in the season. But it was a very, very small system, and this is what this is, if it even winds up developing. The Hurricane Center did mention it in their discussion. I think they brought the chances down to either 10% or zero, I forget. But the bottom line is they're not expecting it to do anything. And even if it fires up briefly, as it's shown here, it's so tiny. I mean, it's just basically a speck, and then it's gone. So let's go back to the system in the Central Atlantic. There it is, just kind of rotates around and mulls around for a couple of days into next week, gradually drops southward before it turns westward. We were talking about this yesterday. Depending on which run we look at, the off-hour runs seem to want to make this into a much stronger tropical storm or hurricane, while the main runs, the 0Z Greenwich Mean Time run and the 12Z Greenwich Mean Time run, tend to have it weaker. If it stays weaker, it is going to wind up moving more westerly because it is going to respond to the low-level flow, which will be more east to west before it winds up getting lifting up and out. Because if you look back over what's happening in the eastern U.S., we have a fairly deep trough coming into the east that's going to pretty much overwhelm everything the way it looks. So the pattern has been signaling this idea of troughing in the east going into the long range, and that looks to be the case at the moment. We know that there'll be a lot of corrections along the way. But once again, it's a matter of watching these puzzle pieces, these chess pieces that you have. Shortwave troughs in the northern part of the jet stream are very much evident here. And just like we saw in Florence, it is a matter of whether the shortwave picks up what's out there in the Atlantic, or does it miss it and leave it behind? And it seems that the one for this coming weekend leaves it behind. And then you have the same setup where it gets underneath this upper high, and the upper high cradles it. You see how it's sort of shaped like a kidney bean here from the south, from east of Florida out into the open waters of the Atlantic. Just kind of and envelopes itself around the tropical system. We'll assume that that's what it is. And then at the same time, you've got this, fairly impressive troughing in the eastern part of the U.S. So it is broad. It is not one of these sharp, deep troughs. You don't have a southerly flow along the East Coast. It's more southwesterly. So anything that gets caught in that is liable to get kicked out to the northeast and stay offshore. It would have to be something much sharper, which is what the European at least implies. Now, but the European handles everything differently. The other thing I would say is, and I mentioned this a couple of times in the last few days, I'm still thinking something toward the end of the month, very beginning of October, something is going to come out of the area from the central and eastern Caribbean. Somewhere down there, we're going to have something develop. Today's GFS did pick up on it a bit, again, as it has on other runs. Looking at the European, though, you get a different view of what's going on here in the Atlantic with respect to the tropics. And models always, seem to have their differences, and we sort of understand that. That's just the way it works. That's the GFS, by the way, so we'll go to the European, and then I'm going to go to the new run, and we'll come back to weather in the U.S. But there's your gale center on the European and it's slower, by the way. I'm sorry, this was the I'm a little bit confused here now. That's Helene that went by on the first shot. Then you get the second shot. Now you get the third shot, which also the European is not nearly as robust with it going into Saturday night into Sunday, because by the time we get to Sunday morning, it's already long gone. So it's a fast mover on this run. Meanwhile, the southern low gets stripped away, and that just kind of falls apart and weakens. And then you get this other system that sort of drops back southwestward and just sits there in the Atlantic. Then it moves towards the Azores, and then it moves northwestward. Then it drops southwestward and south, and then it turns more south. And here we are at 240 hours at virtually almost the same spot as where this system has started with. So the Europeans got a different idea of what's going to be happening in the Atlantic. So I'm not really at this stage. I'm not really too overly concerned with it, mainly because most of the time when this sort of stuff happens, it does just get left behind, and it's really a sort of wasted exercise of energy to get all wrapped up in it. So it's kind of interesting to me that you've got this large cold feature that drops southward, and then eventually it warms up into maybe some kind of subtropical or tropical storm. That's usually how it plays out. You'll notice the westerlies in the Atlantic Ocean are pushed pretty far to the north. The European has a deep trough, much like the GFS does, toward the end of the forecast period, which would be toward next weekend. This would certainly imply some really nice, cool autumn air coming in to the U.S. Back to the GFS, and we've got the new one, so we'll take a look at Europe first, and then we'll come home. By the way, I'm feeling a bit off today. I'm just tired, so bear with me if I seem a little bit unresponsive or a little off just a bit. I'm not 100%. Okay, so you guys had your system move through. There's another one coming here for Thursday, a weak wave. So you've got tomorrow to deal with some rain, maybe a little wind, but no biggie. And then this system is the one that was supposed to be the powerhouse. I got to tell you, every run is weaker with this. We went from having a low that with pressures down in the 970s. Now we've got a low that's barely down below 1,000 on this latest run, and it moves on to the northeast. So the storm does look a bit weaker on its approach, and then it strengthens a bit once it moves on to into east toward Eastern Europe and eventually into Siberia. So I don't know if we look at the upper air with this, and I'm going to leave it to your forecasters there at the UK Met office at Met Iran, because this is new stuff to me, so I'm still trying to figure out how a lot of this stuff works. But there's your upper air feature, not a half bad looking upper air trough for Thursday. Yeah, I mean, you can barely find. I just want to go back. Let me go back about 4 runs. Oh, look at the difference, folks. You see, this is why. This is going back 4 model runs ago. This wrapped up upper air system. Certainly, it's understandable seeing this on the upper air. You have a strong ridges on either side. That is a very, very intense feature that was being shown 4 runs ago, 5 runs ago, 6 runs ago. When we look at it now, this was yesterday, so if we jump to today's for the same time frame, you can barely find it. I mean, look how much weaker it is. I don't know, if that holds up, this system for Saturday night, Sunday, which was supposed to be the strongest of the 3 or 4 of them that went through here, looks like it might wind up being more along the lines of the weakest of the bunch. If this is the case, the models have really just backed off on intensity here. So, there's time enough here where you want to wait for another model run or two. It's hard to imagine it would go back to that same intense solution that it had. Maybe it'll split the difference somehow, but I'm not really too overly concerned here. If all we're going to have is sort of a weak shortwave trough that moves on through, it really doesn't amplify until it moves over into Germany, and particularly when it gets into Poland. This is when it starts to get wrapped up and moving right along as it moves into Siberia. So perhaps it's not going to wind up being nearly as big a problem as you might think. So let's run back. Let's go back and see now what the new GFS is telling us for the Atlantic here. And then we'll come back home and describe what's happening. So I'm looking at this for the first time, by the way. So we're looking at this together here. And all right, going into, you've got, pretty active jet stream in Canada and an active jet stream across the Atlantic. There's your low that drops off. It's not even really, you can barely find whatever feature it represents, that southern part of that trough. So there's the upper low that drops off. The next short wave trough comes off. It looks like it tries to pick it up, but doesn't quite get there. I mean, it's hard to, that trough in the northern stream there, going into the early next week, you would think it would pick it up and carry it away to the northeast, but I guess not. It keeps wanting to leave it behind. You also can see the next trough in the United States dropping in. So we'll go to the surface here. I'm just kind of curious as to what it's showing. Maps courtesy of tropicaltidbits.com and Levi Cowan's great website. And here we go. So there's your spinning low, surface low, and then it just sort of drops southward. In fact, it gets pretty far south here, but it also stays fairly weak, and that's why. So this is a week from today. It's at 27 and 46. I mean, look, I'm not going to lose a whole lot of sleep over this. I'll be curious to see what it does, but this is, again, to me, this sort of thing is just more fun to look at, I guess, than anything else, because it's in the middle of the Atlantic and not bothering anybody. So yeah, it's hard to, unless I start to see signs of this becoming a more important feature and being stronger. Is it going to wind up getting eventually carried far enough to the west? It's hard for me to get excited over or worried about systems unless they start to pass 60 degrees west. Once they pass 60 degrees west, then I pay some attention and see if they can make it to 70, because that usually is where where these storms will get to, and then recurve up and out. The U.S. weather, meanwhile, we'll go upper air time for North America. That's a nice trough there on the GFS on the new 168. Go back on the one from 12Z. The off cycle run looks like the trough is sharper as it drops in. See, this is where when you have an upper air like this is where, if you have a tropical system, for example, if you have something in the Gulf of Mexico coming around the periphery of this upper high, this is where you can shoot something up the coast east of the Appalachians, which could be a big rain and perhaps even somewhat of a big wind producer all the way up the coast. But you don't have a system in play here, so there's nothing to worry about. Plus, the upper air is now decidedly different from what we saw going in when Florence was around, when we had the ridge in the east. It seems that the ridge in the east is going to be at least going away, at least for a while. The flow in Canada is continuing to look rather cold in the longer term, and I don't see any reason on this. The runs are fairly consistent, showing this, both the European and the GFS model showing this setting up. So we'll bring up the full US, start from the beginning, so at least we can get an idea of what's going to be happening here for the weekend. We've had a decent day today. We'll have a decent day tomorrow. The next weather, the system right now that is rolling through, that's going to be rolling through the northern plains tomorrow and the upper Great Lakes with some thunderstorms and the potential for severe weather, that runs up into Canada south of James Bay. As far as the weather here in the east is concerned, it looks pretty minimal with that. Cold front comes through early Saturday morning. Got a cool high coming in. This sort of looks like what we went through last weekend with the front stalling out and a little wave that develops on it. In fact, the GFS is growing a little more bullish with keeping rain in here Saturday night into Sunday, because the front doesn't really get that far south. So the push here of the dry air in Canada is not nearly as robust. And then, of course, once the high pulls out, you start to bring the warmer, more humid air, and the threat for showers back Monday night, Tuesday, and even on Wednesday, because we're going to have to wait for this deep upper trough to swing down into the Great Lakes, and that isn't going to happen until late next week. I got to go back one model run because we don't have out far enough. But this is what the run earlier today did with this nice big high. So it would suggest that next weekend will be, and into the week that follows, that first week of October, if the models are correct, we're going to have some fairly cool air. And again, I would also look very carefully with respect to the tropics. I'm going to want to pay attention down in the Eastern Caribbean uh, toward the end of the month. I think something is going to eventually try to come out of there. Where it goes and what it does to that, yet the earlier run tried to bring something up into the Bahamas. Who knows? That's in the category of the long range. We do have, by the way, I think it's worth noting. I when I did my Patreon live stream this morning, I did touch on a system that is on the Pacific side, which, usually in the Eastern Pacific, we don't really look at these things too much. But there is a system there that was just disturbed weather. And I happened to mention that if you look down here in Baja California, in the Gulf of California, I happened to mention that there have been instances of tropical systems, of tropical depressions, and even tropical storms forming inside that small waterway. And indeed, that happened today. The Hurricane Center up found from its satellite analysis that there was a tight little circulation that developed, and they have a tropical depression here. I think it's Tropical Depression 19, and they're talking about flooding rains for the mountains in Mexico and landslides and that kind of thing. Some of that moisture, I think, looks like it's going up into parts of Arizona and into Southern California. So there could be some rains moving up northward from there. But very interesting that we're seeing this with respect to the depression forming in that particular area. So just overall, I'm going to get the camera there back in the middle so I can face forward. So overall, we had this 2 week stretch where we were talking all Florence all the time, and it was so overwhelming that we had those other tropical systems that we couldn't even give a whole lot of attention to, and Isaac just fell apart. Helene was pretty much a non-event until it just sort of brushed the Azores and then went into Ireland and east from there. So now that Florence is gone, it's a bit more of a relaxed mood around here, which is a good thing. I was doing 3 live streams a day between 2 YouTube live streams and Facebook, and I have to tell you, they were wiping me out. So I'm going to come to the board and talk to you guys in just a second, but let me do my shameless self-promotion at this point, if you don't mind. But I do have my new platform on Patreon, which, by the way, we've been doing morning live streams at 9 a.m. just for Patreon members. And you can join up. Website posts that I do from my website are going up on the Patreon page so you can see them with no ads, fast loading. There's a Patreon app, and hopefully in another couple of weeks, my app will be out as well, and you'll get that. Also, you're able to message me. I will stop um, doing responding to messages off my Facebook weather page because it's just overwhelming, and I have to tell you, also somewhat annoying because what winds up happening a lot of the time is that I've had people that'll call, message me, and they'll ask me for a forecast, and I don't even sometimes I don't even get a thank you out of it, and it's I've had enough. So I'm that plus between that and the flat earthers, the geoengineerists, the weather controllers, and just some other people that feel they need to express their opinions when it's not relevant. Um, we don't have that. It's a nice, clean environment from that respect, and I think you'll enjoy it. So if you're interested, there are several tiers of membership that I set up. It's $2 a month, and if you want to go a little higher, you can. So I just leave it up to you. And it's a way for me to support what I'm doing, because I really would love to be doing this just full time, and maybe one day I'll be able to get there. So I thank you very much for those of you who have signed up. And by the way, I also, excuse me, have been doing posts specifically for Patreon members, and no one else sees them. They don't even go on the website. So I'll be doing more of that. So here I'm going to put the link on the chat board for those of you who'd like to. Um, let me just type something up here. And I appreciate your time. And the other thing I just want to mention real quick, we'll do that now. I do have a link to Amazon that's on the descriptor to this live stream. I will put it also on the chat board. I'm a participant in the Amazon Services LLC program, which is an affiliate advertising program designed to provide a means for this channel to earn fees by linking to Amazon.com and its affiliated sites. So if you shop on Amazon and use that link, you get your stuff at Amazon's prices, and they throw me back a little bit of coin, and I get a couple of cigars out of it, and everybody's happy. So thank you for those of you who have used the link. The names on the European side, Scott Bruller, I'm thinking that's a UK Met Office thing, but I'm sure one of the folks from Ireland or England or Scotland that's on the board when they come on, they can answer that question, because they've been doing it. They've been dealing with that for a long time, but they have their own criteria, and it's not tropical when they name these storms. So they give names to these non-tropical storms, which, it works for them. I don't think it's useful here, because at least for Europe, for the UK and Ireland, a lot of these storms, these big gale centers, are coming in off the North Atlantic. Here in the US in the wintertime, sometimes you get significant snow amounts from weak little frontal waves that don't do anything but just put down a mantle of snow cover and not much else. So it's kind of hard for me to equate the two and give the value of what a name storm is supposed to mean, which is basically there's a problem here and we need to pay attention. So we give it a name so that everybody understands that this is maybe a little bit more extraordinary than than it otherwise is. We're not talking about some patchy drizzle and some scattered showers coming in, but we're talking about heavy rains and gales. So I think it kind of works for the North Atlantic, for the Northeast Atlantic. I don't think it works as well for much of the U.S. because the kind of weather we have to deal with is different. And it gets confusing after a while, because you've got the storms in the west, you've got the storms in the east, the Great Lakes, the plains, the northern, central, and southern plains, and they could all be different. And you could have multiple ones going on at the same time. So, I don't know that it works for us here. It works for hurricanes, obviously, but I don't know that it works for winter storms. Tuddy's Young, could a tropical storm or hurricane come into the Gulf of Mexico? There's some work that suggests that if you look at the tracks of the first storms of the year, that usually kind of sets the table for the season. And sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. It seems to me that, the hint early on in the season that this was going to be more of an Atlantic type of season than a Gulf season. We've had two systems in the Gulf of Mexico, but neither one of them became hurricanes. They both were tropical storms. Alberto, which was a subtropical storm, and Gordon back a couple of weeks ago. Joshua Pan, thanks for hitting Super Chat tonight. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Just trying to go back. I'm just rolling back on the chat to David Allen. Storm Alley hit the UK hard yesterday, especially Northern Ireland. 2 people died, dozens injured. Can you take a look at Europe, as we just did? So I'm sorry, I'm scrolling backwards. So you got it. You guys watching from Europe, it's 11:30. It's coming up on 10:30 Greenwich time. So I did you guys first, so this way, if you're getting ready for bed, you're covered. Okay. Last couple of satellite pictures is Weather Hub TV. Shows a blow up of convection with the system. You're talking about the one that's kind of east of South America there near Venezuela. I can bring it up here. So, okay. Whoops. Where's my window? All right, I gotta find where. Hang on a second, folks. Oh, there it is. So, okay. No, that's not it. All right. Why is it doing that? Now we got it. Okay, so let me bring up. I'm going to bring up the satellite, the wide Atlantic satellite from late this afternoon. See what we can see out of this. And hopefully it won't knock me offline because there's been something going on with some of these satellite pictures from the Hurricane Center's website with these GO 16 in this area with the the GIFs or the GIFs or however you pronounce that. Okay, so there's you see the disturbed weather there. You can actually there is a little bit of turning there. That's northeast of the coast of South America, kind of east northeast of Venezuela, but it's not really showing to me any signs of organization yet. And also, if you look to the north and west of there, that brownish shading that you see, that is actually some Saharan dust that is being drawn northward. There's another big upper low off the east coast. You see the wave that's coming off the east coast, but east of there, there's a really big upper low that's sitting out there, and it's drawing up the dust northward, kind of thinning it out a bit. And it looks like there might even be a little bit that's come off the African coast in the last couple of days. Also, another upper low that's way out in the north of the eastern Atlantic. Looks like it's north of the Canary Islands. So you got a lot of upper lows running around. It's going to be tough to get something to come out of the intertropical convergence zone. In fact, I can actually see if you look at there's clouds that are blowing northeastward from just north of South America, the northeastern coast there of South America, out where the Leeward Islands should be, the Leeward and Windward Islands. You can see these clouds that are kind of getting blown away to the northeast. So even if something were to form in that disturbed weather that you see in the intertropical convergence zone that the Hurricane Centers mentions in their discussion, the shear is going to take it apart in another day or two anyway. So it's just not going to be able to develop into anything. I think you might see something in the coming out of the Caribbean at the very end of the month, last few days of September, first few days of October. I think that might be a time where you might want to pay attention to. Let's see. Oh, you have to be on YouTube and not on Patreon to interact with you. Okay, yeah, it's a little confusing, Timothy. So what? Look, I'm still trying to work out the kinks with regards to that. The video is you're going to be able to see it. It's on YouTube. If you're on Patreon, it's a YouTube video, but it is not visible to it's not visible to YouTube people to the YouTube audience because I have made it invisible and only the Patreon folks can see it. And I've been messaging you on everybody on Patreon. I've been posting the link about 8:30 in the morning as soon as I can get it. But for some reason today, I was having trouble with YouTube actually getting that specific link. So I'm going to have to keep playing with it. It worked fine yesterday. It didn't work that well today. If you miss it, then I put the video back up. Again, only for Patreon folks, you get the Patreon link and you get to watch it. Okay? Give me a little time. Just with everything I got to do, Timothy, give me a little time. I promise you I'll get it straightened out. It's very frustrating for me because I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, and then certain things are happening that are keeping it from working. And Timothy, by the way, go ahead and complain because I'll listen. Okay, I will definitely listen. Does excess dust, Ruru 25 from the Sahara, prevent the development of hurricanes? It does actually. A lot of the Saharan dust that comes off is because of the very, very dry air from the Sahara, and it comes out into the over the ocean. And dry air for tropical storm development is no good. If you have a system and dry air winds up getting entrained in it, it winds up shutting off the thunderstorm machine. Is to put it simply. So yeah, dry air, Saharan dust, conducive for tropical storm development. Daniel Valericiano, Valericiano, or Valenriciano. Oh, I hope I said it correctly. Um, uh, Florence is worrying you. Don't be. At this point, I wouldn't be because there's too much going on off the East Coast. Even if that low level, if the circulation on the satellite, which doesn't look half bad by the way, in terms of how, being impressive, it's there's a good twist in there, but there's too much going on. There's too much shear. I think that the surface low that separates from that will eventually just weaken. And the other thing is, remember, it's going over water that just recently Florence went over and upwelled. So it's going to be going over a lot of the same ocean, and that water is a lot cooler. It's probably a good 5 degrees cooler. We can even take a look. Let me see if I can find it. Uh, let's see. Pull it up real fast here. Yeah. Okay. So, um, all right. I'm going to try to see if I can get this anomaly loop to work. There hasn't been too much of an impact with regards to Florence. With respect, I thought there would have been some, but apparently not. But we'll look at the where it is above and below average. All right, so let's bring that up. I'm going to bring that up here. So we take a look at the ocean water temperatures and what's happened. So this is the 7-day uh, ocean water temperature anomaly, and actually water temperatures off the southeast coast of the United States are still running about 1 degree Celsius above average. And if you go up further up the coast, it looks like they're running as much as 2 degrees Celsius above average. Meanwhile, you go out into the rest of the Gulf of Mexico, the Caribbean, the tropical Atlantic, out to about 50 west. You do have ocean water temperatures that are about average, but notice go north of 15 north and then pushing your way even into west of 60. You do have a large area below average temperatures. And by the way, this is probably the result of the upwelling where it went below average there. So I'd be curious to see what the actual ocean water temperatures are. So we'll switch over to that map now so we can take a look. That's the departure, so we can at least see what the actual ocean water temperatures are. I mean, they're still supportive of tropical storm and hurricane strength. Use the 28 degrees Celsius line. That's where really the super warm water is. It extends pretty far north out in the Atlantic, up almost up to 38, 39 degrees north, between 60 and 75 degrees west. So the water's pretty warm there in that shelf, except right along the immediate coast of New Jersey and Long Island and just offshore. The ocean water is still pretty warm, so it looks like maybe the upwelling impact here was rather minimal, I suppose. Uh, Certainly didn't cool off the waters that much. I thought it would have cooled them off a bit more, but I guess not. But the bottom line is, I don't necessarily think that the upper air is favorable for anything. If it's the southern end of that yesterday's frontal boundary that winds up uh, dropping southeastward and then southward, it looks, most of the models really tend to just make it fall apart. And just judging from what's going on the satellite, it's hard to see how it's going to overcome that big upper low that's sitting just off the East Coast. Okay. Veronica bringing up something about the naming here. And let's see. She did say they are pre-named for the storms for the year, just to bring awareness to everybody. Exactly, exactly. Um, and David Allen points out that to Scott Briller, the storms. This is for the UK and Ireland. The naming of storms there have to have sustained winds of at least 45 miles an hour and gusts to hurricane force in order for them, with the potential for gusts to hurricane force, for them to give him a name. And I'm just rolling through the last of the chat, your comments here. Um, awesome. Okay, Robert Hurley. Joe, is Florence going to make a comeback? We'll watch. I don't think so. I don't think so. Um, okay, I think we can just end it here. Oh, I seem to see Anthony Orr's. Anthony Orr is our resident statistician. He's wonderful. He's always finding tidbits for me, digging deep. But we were talking about Florence coming back, and Ivan, back as in, I believe it was 2004, was one where it did what it did, went out, and then it regenerated, and they had to bring the name back. As long as the Hurricane Center can kind of, if there's a trail that the Hurricane Center can find where you can connect the dots and watch, where you actually can follow the remnant low along, if it winds up regenerating, they will give it back the same name that it had. As long as it looks as if it came from the same system, then it'll get the same name. If it's a situation where it might be in this one, where the remnants of Florence drop down into one place and the other system kind of forms totally on its own and it's completely separate. If it does, then we'll go on to the next name, the K name, which is Kirk. But I see he's doing his moderator work here because someone's posts have disappeared. So I'm guessing he'll let me know if it was a flat earther, a weather controller, a geoengineerist, or all of the above. Because I've been enjoying myself too much lately with getting rid of them. Okay, retirement for me, maybe not from this. This is what I want to do. I want to do this. I want to do my websites. I want to do all that stuff, and I want to produce product for everybody. And just like everybody else, I got to eat. So if I can generate enough interest and from people and keep growing my audience the way I'm growing, and you guys have been so incredibly supportive, it'd be great because that'll then I can completely focus on everything on the internet. No, not you, 99 Wolves. It's not you. Anthony took care of whoever it was because his messages were retracted. It's not you. You're one of we. Yes, he means Florida. No, retiring. Okay, I'm sorry. Because I started talking about what I'm thinking about doing because I'm wrapping up this video. Will Florence be retired? I don't know. It might be because of its impact in North Carolina. That's up to them. I'm gonna guess that if I had to bet, yeah, if I had to bet, um, I will bet. I would bet on the fact that they probably will retire Florence. Yes, Veronica, I do. I do need sleep. I did not sleep well at all last night. As I said from the beginning, I'm just a wee bit off today. If you follow it to that statement to its natural conclusion, you'll understand what I'm getting at. But hopefully tonight I will have a good night's sleep and I will be able to recover from the last couple of weeks. This stuff does take its toll, and between all this, I drive 125 miles a day to and from work. Joe Grasso, do I anticipate an active winter? Um, I don't know. I'm not good with the long range, Joe. I've openly said this many, many times. It's not something that I've been able to ever get my head around. So I'm not. There are a lot of guys there that a lot of guys out there that are really into it and are far better than I am with it. So I'm just kind of. The only thing I will say is watch to see if the hurricane season shuts down early, because there is a loose connection between when hurricane seasons shut down early on the Atlantic side and a colder start to the winter in the eastern part of the United States, which, when you think about it, kind of makes sense, because the mechanisms that would shut the hurricane season down early in the Atlantic basin are the same mechanisms that will be bringing down colder air earlier or faster during the fall and winter months. So it kind of that's sort of one of those things where you're watching it happen, and it's you sort of reflexively predict it. You say, oh, the hurricane season just shut off early, must mean that winter is going to start early. It seems to work more often than not. But there's not too many other things that we can connect between the hurricane seasons and the kind of winter we have, because remember, we're talking about a really long season from the standpoint of winter, where things can happen from as early as November to as late as April. Um, yeah, I don't. You guys know me that have been watching me for the last couple of years. I'm just not a high. I don't get into that. We follow things very logically, very methodically here, and I take you along for the ride. And it's the best way to look at this sort of stuff, because um, look, you know that if I get nervous about something, then yeah, you need to maybe get a little bit nervous. And if I'm not, we can watch this calmly, and we can learn and appreciate in the meantime. I get a kick out of people that get on here sometimes, new people, and they'll just make those sort of reflexive statements about things, and then and I saw this with Florence, and then Florence was one of the most well-behaved, well-forecasted storms that I've seen in my career. And, all the critics all of a sudden are gone. They don't hear from them. I wonder why. Um, well, anyway, it's very sad what's happened in North Carolina. The death toll from this morning I heard was 32. I don't know if that number has gone up. I'm going to be curious to see pictures from the Outer Banks, which I still haven't seen. I'm sure they're probably out there, but I just haven't had an opportunity to take a look. So one last round of shameless self-promoting. Um, Joe Grasso, any opinion on the forecaster caught exaggerating the winds in North Carolina? If you're talking about the Weather Channel guy that was having trouble, walking in the wind, and then seeing the people behind him just sort of casually strolling along, I think that that sort of speaks for itself. I don't need to venture any opinion, and I have to tell you, I have a real problem with I have a real problem with sticking people outside in hurricane conditions, putting their lives in danger. Here, on the one hand, you're trying to convey the message that to people that you need to evacuate, you need to do this, you need to, you need to get, out of your home, you need to go to shelter, you need to do what you need to do, to protect your life and property. And then what are we doing? We're standing out there putting our lives in danger in the face of hurricane force winds, especially what we saw when I was watching with Maria back last year, Hurricane Maria going into Puerto Rico, and Irma going into Cuba, both as Category 5s. I wouldn't do it. I would not put my life in jeopardy, particularly if at all. And I'm 60. I'm almost 60. My kids are grown and gone. I have grandchildren now. I'm not doing it. And if you ask me to do it and I say no, and you tell me it's a choice between that and my job, goodbye, because it's just not happening. I don't know how a younger person does it that has kids at home. I'm sorry. I know your job's important, but how much risk are you willing to take for um, for for your job, where at the end of the day, if they want to get rid of you, they're going to get rid of you. And I can tell you from my own experience, you can cooperate all you want, Uh, if it doesn't score you any points, you will not get any points for doing whatever it is you're doing. Because if someone walks in and walks in one day as a new boss and looks at you and decides, I don't like your face, you're fired. All of that means nothing. So why are you putting your life in danger? End of lecture. I like telling the young people where I work when we get into these sorts of conversations, because I'm the big daddy in the group now, so they get to hear my stories, and I've got almost 40 years of experience. You know, why you would put your life in danger is beyond me. Anyway, just one more time, if you're still on and you're interested, if you shop on the Amazon link that I just put up on the chat, you can get your stuff, and Amazon will throw me back some coin out of their pocket. And do please consider joining us on my Patreon platform that I've set up. And I'm going to put the link back up here again. It's also on the description to this video. The tiers start at just $2 a month. And if you're feeling more generous, you could go higher. It really goes a long way to help what I'm doing with respect to YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and my 3 websites, meteorologistjoechaffee.com, weatherlongisland.com, and nycweathernow.com. So let's call it a night at this point so I can take care of my tummy. And tomorrow we'll probably, those of you who are on Patreon, will shoot for a 9 o'clock live stream. And Seth Dominus. I like that. That is a great name. I like that. Are we going to get another hurricane in Texas? Lorenzo Rodriguez. There's still time, but at some point when a major cold front comes through, probably in the next couple of weeks, that may put an end to the Gulf of Mexico season. We'll see. But it also seems like everything wants to favor the Atlantic this year rather than the Gulf of Mexico side in terms of development. But that's a general statement on my part. Doesn't mean that something can't sneak in late in the game. But hey, we're almost 11 days from the month of October. You do start to see a deceleration in tropical storm activity, particularly for the second half of the month. So basically, the clock's ticking on the hurricane season at this point. We know that, but I also think there will be another burst of activity before it's all said and done. All right, tomorrow, just back to normal. Patreon members, you'll get a live stream probably at around 9 o'clock. Usual website posts, they'll be on the Patreon platform, and they'll also be on the websites themselves. And live stream tomorrow night, let's shoot for, it'll either be 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock Eastern time. I got to see how my day goes. So let's wrap it up with these last two. Timothy Veltman, I'm going to go relax right now. Joe jinxed it when he said homegrown and didn't. God, Joe, why so mean? Exactly. I did jinx it. And, just as what everybody gave up on the tropical Atlantic firing up some storms, we got 2 hurricanes and a tropical storm out of it with Florence, Helene, and Isaac, and they all came very, very quickly. Not a surprise. And Seth Dominus reminding, so Matthew hit first. I'm sorry, Matthew hit first blood 6666 HR of 17. Remember. Okay, can you kind of translate that into English that a 60-year-old can understand? Okay, I get the Matthew part of it because that's Hurricane Matthew. Not understanding the rest of it. So translate, please. Okay. And I think there's a number of us are asking this. So Seth Dominus 777. Please respond. Hour 6666 of 2017. So you're saying that Matthew did what on the 6,666th hour of 2017? 240. Wait, that doesn't make. Hold on. You're making this old man do a lot of math. 24 times 30 is, I want to say 760. Okay. I'm just doing it off the top of my head. 760. Okay. Roughly. All right. So so is that what you're saying? took its first reported victim on the 6,000. Well, okay, but that's just a coincidence. It could have been, you know, the 6,665th hour, and then you wouldn't have the omen number, which is actually three sixes and not four, but, you know, that's a whole other story. And there actually is no biblical reference, from what I understand, for the three sixes. Okay, now we're kind of getting away from things. All right, I got to go. I'm tired. Have a great night, everybody. 56 minutes long. It's time for me to say goodnight. So we'll see you tomorrow, either at 6 or at 7. Just watch the YouTube channel for the schedule. I'll put the schedule up earlier in the day, so you can plan accordingly. And oh, one more thing. Patreon those of you who want to join up Patreon, here's the link. Okay? And thank you very much. Have a great evening, folks. We'll see you tomorrow.